Let's get going.
Peter B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Friday, the 5th of May, Cinco de Mayo, 2017. And once again, we are working out the kinks and feeding the recording of this audio podcast in a live video on Facebook. And you can find it at Peter B. Collins on the Facebook system. And today, we're going to try something new. I'm going to conduct an interview at the half hour with John Kiriakou. John is a former CIA officer. He is the only American government individual who has been sent to prison over the Bush-era torture program. And it's not because he tortured anybody. He actually refused to torture people. And he's become quite a whistleblower, a very interesting man. And this is his new book. It's a galley edition. I believe the final print is just coming off the presses today. It's called Doing Time Like a Spy. And John Kiriakou will be phoning in. You won't be able to see him because I haven't figured out how to bring in a video feed to feed into the Facebook video feed. But we're going to be talking with John on the half hour. And I will welcome your phone calls to talk to John or to talk about any of the issues that I raise here in my news and comment podcast today. First up, we've got reaction to the Republican effort to scuttle Obamacare. And, of course, they did narrowly pass in the House yesterday a repeal bill that also is supposed to launch the Trump health care scheme. But it's interesting, and the Washington Post reports, that just a few hours after Trump left that hug-a-thon with all those right-wing Tea Party maniacs who are gloating over denying health care access to millions of Americans, some of whom will die, so that they can ram through unnecessary tax cuts for corporations and the ultra-wealthy in this country. But just hours after that Rose Garden celebration, Trump was in New York, the first time he's been back to his home city since the inauguration, and he was running late. He stood up the Prime Minister of Australia, who, what is that guy's name? Malcolm Turnbull, made him wait for a couple of hours. And then when they did get together, Trump said, well, you know, we have a failing health care. I shouldn't say this to our great gentleman and my friend from Australia. Now, this is the guy, if you remember back in January, who Trump hung up on in their first phone call when Turnbull asked him if he was going to honor the Obama-era agreement to accept some refugees who have been held by Australia offshore from their country on an island in the South Pacific. At any rate, Turnbull, who Trump was pissed at in January, is now a great gentleman and his friend from Australia. And he said, because you have better health care than we do. Now, that's a stunning admission. And at the Washington Post, reporter Aaron Blake looks at the history of Donald Trump and single-payer health care, because that is the system in Australia that he was praising. And they even call it Medicare in Australia, and it is Medicare for all, which is what many of us, have aspirations for here in the good old U.S. of A. So back in 2000, in his book, The America We Deserve, here's a quote from the Trumper. We must have universal health care. Just imagine the improved quality of life for our society as a whole. The Canadian-style single-payer system in which all payments for medical care are made to a single agency as opposed to a large number of HMOs and insurance companies with their diverse rules, claim forms, and deductibles. And don't forget the profiteering there, Donald. Helps Canadians live longer and healthier than Americans. Just last year in the campaign, he was on David Letterman's show in 2016. He held up Scotland's socialized system as the ideal. Quote, a friend of mine was in Scotland recently. He got very, very sick. They took him by ambulance. He was there for 4 days. He was really in trouble, and they released him, and he said, where do I pay? And they said, there's no charge. And Trump said, not only that, he said it was like great doctors, great care. I mean, we could have a great system in this country. And then we look at the promises that Trump made during and after the campaign. On 60 Minutes in September 2015, Trump said, everybody's got to be covered. This is an un-Republican thing for me to say. I'm going to take care of everybody. I don't care if it costs me votes or not. Everybody's going to be taken care of much better than they're taken care of now. Well, when you look at the package of dog poop that was passed narrowly by the House of Representatives yesterday, it just shows that Trump is a liar. Now, I know that's not news. But what's interesting is that the people who stand to lose under this Trumpcare GOP health reform, as they call it, the gutting of Obamacare, the replacement with far inferior coverage, well, many of the losers are going to be people who voted for Trump. Now, the New York Times and my local paper, the San Francisco Chronicle, both did pieces today where they talk about the winners and the losers. And the winners really are predictable. People who don't want to have insurance, people who want less comprehensive health insurance, like women who don't plan to have babies, so they're not going to sign up for a policy with maternity care, right? Well, these are very limited cases and really don't respect the real watering down of coverage that is part and parcel of the Republican so-called reform package. So this is, those are the so-called winners. The losers are the poor, older Americans, people with pre-existing conditions, state governments, hospitals, Planned Parenthood. Now, when it comes to hospitals, many of them were guaranteed new customers under Obamacare, and on that basis, the package made cuts in the Medicare reimbursements and Medicaid reimbursements to hospitals. And these are not being changed. They're not being reinstated even to the level of 2013 before Obamacare took effect. And, of course, the hammering of Planned Parenthood is purely political. Anybody who's rational knows that cutting funding to Planned Parenthood is going to mean more cases of undiagnosed sexually transmitted diseases, breast cancer, cervical cancer, many complications for women who seek reproductive health care that doesn't involve abortions. And because of the Christianist intent of the people who are trying to cut funding and kill Planned Parenthood over, they say, the videos that were released a couple of years ago that were selectively edited. They were gotcha videos that were purported to show that Planned Parenthood was trading or making money off the sale of body parts from aborted fetuses. And, that's such an exaggeration. And some of the tissue was being given to laboratories and scientists for research. But the idea that they were trafficking in aborted fetus parts is just ridiculous. And that's the linchpin of the argument that the right-wing panderers to the evangelical right use in this debate. Now, I heard a woman talk today. Kim Belshé is the former head of Health and Human Services for the state of California. And she put up a graph at this breakfast meeting showing that the Medicaid cuts will hit the California counties that voted for Trump and that have the highest levels of Medicaid participation. It's called Medi-Cal here in California, and essentially those with incomes under about $30,000 qualify for Medi-Cal. And it's just deeply ironic that the counties in California that went most heavily for Trump in the election will see the greatest cutbacks in this, very essential lifeline medical care. In its lead editorial, the New York Times lowered the boom on Trump and the Republicans, and in particular noting how the Obamacare process, while Republicans obstructed it every step of the way, it took over, 14, 15, maybe even 16 months. But the Republicans didn't hold a single hearing about the package that was, just stitched together in the hours before they took a vote. Nobody really knew what was in the package. Nobody has seen any scoring of the true cost of this legislation, and also any indication of exactly how many people will lose their health care coverage. We heard 24 million in the previous scoring of the bill that failed in March, and I can only assume that that number will be higher. But the Times notes that it takes a machete to Medicaid, $880 billion cut over 10 years. It slashes insurance subsidies for people who rely on them. It eliminates the individual mandate, and that means that the insured pool is going to include fewer healthy people. And in order to spread the risk, that's what you do. You sell insurance to people who need it and people who don't use it. And that's where the actuaries can figure out what the true risks are and what, therefore, the prices need to be. So this is a real ugly prospect. And what we are waiting to see is how the public and political leaders, mostly Democrats, respond to this. Now, as this bill reaches the Senate, even hardline right-wing Republicans like Tom Cotton of Arkansas are saying that they don't plan to use the blueprint provided by the House. So there could be substantial changes. And the best hope for progressives and Democrats is that this bill will become an orphan, that the House version will never be matched in a sufficient way by Senate action to put together a final bill in conference. And therefore, Obamacare, in a month or two, may still be the law of the land. The repeal will have failed, and the House members, including all of the Republicans from California, including a number who said that they were on the fence about it, they voted for it, and they cannot recall, they cannot erase the vote that they have taken. And a guy like Darrell Issa, who nearly was defeated last November, he was on the fence about this, but he did vote for it, and it appears that he may pay a price. Now, I don't know if gray death is included in the coverage of this new Trump package. Nobody probably knows, but I'm learning about this for the first time. Gray death is a drug, a mixture of drugs that looks like concrete mix, and it varies in consistency from a hard, chunky material to a fine powder. It is a combination of several opioids blamed for thousands of fatal overdoses nationally, and the elements of it in the cocktail here include heroin, fentanyl, carfentanil, which is sometimes used as an animal tranquilizer on elephants, and the synthetic opioid, which is given a number. It's U47700. So an expert from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation said, "Gray death is one of the scariest combinations I've ever seen in nearly 20 years of forensic chemistry drug analysis. There's been a wave of overdoses in Alabama, Georgia, and Ohio blamed on gray death. And in Ohio, the coroner's office serving the Cincinnati area says a similar compound has been coming in for months. Georgia has received 50 overdose cases involving gray death just in the past 3 months. That's a new one for me, perhaps for you as well. Meanwhile, the Trump wrecking crew is working on dismantling the Dodd-Frank financial protection law, which was a very weak successor to the Glass-Steagall Act that Bill Clinton signed into repeal back in, I think, 1999. So coming out of the House Financial Services Committee, on a party line vote, they rejected all Democratic amendments to the bill. They are going to kill 40 provisions of the Dodd-Frank Act. And the Republicans say, well, this is to help little banks. It's not to help the big banks. You don't have to believe that, because I don't. And the Republicans say, look, big banks have done okay under Dodd-Frank, but credit unions, community banks, they're being stifled by the regulatory burden. Well, these are not believable rationales. And let's just take the case of Wells Fargo. I happen to be a customer of Wells Fargo. I describe myself as an involuntary passenger in the Wells Fargo wagon because 15 years ago, the bank I liked was bought by Wells Fargo, and I've stayed with them. But they, of course, are trying to clean up from the scandal. where they put so much pressure on the young bankers who populate the lobbies of their institutions, their branches, were pressured to go out and produce enough sales quotas to meet sales quotas that they created fake accounts. They fraudulently created credit cards and savings accounts and checking accounts for people and used that to meet their quotas so that they didn't get fired. And many of the customers who were defrauded were targeted because they were immigrants, including known undocumented immigrants. So this is a very a very sinister approach to banking. And Wells Fargo has not been slapped by regulators so far. They have, settled and published some information that I'll get to here in just a second. But one of the things that is in place is that everybody who has a Wells Fargo account agrees that you cannot sue the bank no matter what happens. Any dispute has to be submitted to binding arbitration. Well, here in California, Senate Bill 33 has cleared the Judiciary Committee in Sacramento, and it is going to allow customers who can show fraud as the basis for their action to sue in court and not be stuck in binding arbitration. And this is a pet peeve of mine, and I recently signed up with a new financial advisor. They had a binding arbitration clause in the agreement, and I said, look, this is a deal breaker. I will not do business with you if you insist on binding arbitration. And to their credit, they removed it. But in binding arbitration, there's little publicity. Usually the public doesn't know a thing about it. And the customer is at a huge disadvantage based on the rules of arbitration proceedings. And so I hope that this bill does become law here in California. And the New York Times columnist James Stewart points out that the whistleblowers who first reported the fraud at Wells Fargo were fired. Yep, they were fired. And so the board that just survived, all of them survived a proxy vote from shareholders just a week ago. The board commissioned an investigation by a law firm, Shearman and Sterling. And James Stewart points out that when the long-awaited independent investigation was released, the role of the whistleblowers was relegated to a single footnote in this 110-page report, and a scholar from Harvard says that's a red flag in itself. It's buried on page 87. My concern is whether whistleblowers were handled properly and to what degree the board bears responsibility. And the article shows that the ethics hotline at Wells Fargo got almost 900 calls during a 4-year period, a 5-year period. And this is where employees call in, they give their names, they say what problems they're trying to report. And one of the lead whistleblowers who exposed the fraudulent marketing schemes is a woman named Claudia Ponce de Leon. And she was fired in 2011 after raising questions about these accounts that were created just to meet the quotas. And her lawyer says the real reason she was fired was that she discovered that a personal banker in her branch had entered multiple new client accounts with the same address, and that it included phone numbers that were bogus. But the bank, in trying to justify her termination, said she was fired for a long and well-documented history of unprofessional conduct, including excessive drinking. And the excessive drinking, says her lawyer, is she went out to lunch once and had one cocktail. So they're fighting tooth and nail over there at Wells Fargo, and it's time that they stop. The effort to investigate the Trump-Russia controversy is taking a bit of a new twist, but it's really kind of meaningless. The Senate Intelligence Committee has not issued subpoenas, but they're politely asking a number of high-profile Trump campaign associates to hand over emails and other records of communications and dealings with Russian officials and business people. What a lame way to proceed. This White House is not going to cooperate with polite requests. They've sent the request to Roger Stone, Carter Page, Paul Manafort, Mike Flynn. And Flynn has already said that he'll only testify with immunity. Roger Stone says, bring it on, I don't care. Carter Page says, you know more about me because I've been under surveillance. You've got better records about me than I do. And over on the House side, Adam Schiff, the Democrat, with his newly appointed co-chair, or actually the chair, Michael Conaway of Texas, who replaces the recused Devin Nunes. They're making noises about doing the same thing. But this is all bullshit. They're not really serious about investigating. And what we really need is an independent counsel, and there has been no sign from anybody in Washington that we're actually going to get any kind of independent investigation of all of these allegations. This week, I did a new in-depth interview with Peter Van Buren, the State Department veteran who took retirement after he was retaliated against for the book that he wrote called We Meant Well, about his experience squandering American tax dollars on useless reconstruction projects in Iraq. And in this conversation, I invite you to listen. Peter Van Buren makes some really sharp criticisms of the State Department where he worked for 24 years. And he notes that Rex Tillerson has left a lot of positions open, has been instructed to cut the budget, and I was surprised to hear that Van Buren doesn't think that that's all bad. Listen to the full interview. But the other point I made to Van Buren is that we've seen Donald Trump cozy up to dictators. El-Sisi of Egypt, Erdogan of Turkey, Duterte in Manila, and recently he's been saying nice things about Kim Jong-un. Well, Van Buren put that in perspective for me with a quick recap of the recent history of State Department bungles.
Yeah, I mean, for example, this idea of embracing dictators, you know, where that Trump seems to say nice things about dictators. Well, America has loved dictators throughout its history. We've never found a Middle Eastern despot we didn't like. We've never found a strong man in Central and South America that wasn't our best buddy. There's nothing new going on here, but it somehow acquires a different spin now that it's Trump. I don't know. Let's call it Donald's Law for now. How about that?
All right. So I think that is an important point, and I think you'll find the interview with Peter Van Buren very interesting and maybe a little provocative for you. Every day I like to pause for a second and thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast with your subscriptions. It's all voluntary. Pauline Nixon, my favorite Nixon, kicks in $10 a month. Mark Giorgini just renewed his annual subscription. So did Walter Jameson. Thank you. And Alice Carlson is a monthly contributor. I really appreciate their support, and I invite you to come on over to peterbcollins.com and take out your own subscription. Just takes a couple of minutes. There's a menu button at the top of the page, no matter what device or browser you use. You click on that, pull it down, click on Become a Subscriber. That takes you to the sign-up page, and we can get you going with a subscription that fits your budget in just a couple of minutes. I hope you will support me in that manner. Coming up just 6 or 8 minutes away, John Kiriakou is going to join me on the phone here. I'm uncovering the phone line so I can see when his call comes in. And you're invited to call in as well. John Kiriakou served in the CIA, and his new book is about the prison sentence that he served under a case that was a crackdown on a whistleblower in the Obama administration. So he'll be calling in here shortly if everything works out, and you're invited to call in if you'd like to talk to John. We'll arrange that for you. My toll-free number for callers, it's not toll-free, I'm just trained to say that, is 415-455-0102. That's 415-455-0102, and I am going to give away a copy of John's new book to one of the people who calls in today. Yesterday, Trump made a big flourish in the Rose Garden. This was before the repeal of Obamacare passed the House. And he trotted out Mike Pence, the Reverend Mike Pence, and they said all kinds of sincere things about religious freedom. And there's a great pushback in an op-ed by Amy Sullivan in today's New York Times. And she writes, in reality, over the past century, since the Johnson Amendment, that's what Trump is upset about, became law, which allowed the IRS to prosecute religious entities that claim tax-exempt status if they engaged in political activity. Well, there's been exactly one prosecution in the last 50 years. So once again, this is a solution in search of a problem. Now, Trump's executive decree, his royal order, appears to be so toothless that the ACLU isn't even bothering to sue over it. But he's sending a signal that says it's okay to have a selective interpretation of the First Amendment, that the right to religious freedom and expression overrides or trumps, if you will, the right of people to be free of religious doctrine, dogma, and proselytizing. And the First Amendment, the Johnson rule, makes a very good distinction between tax-exempt organizations and those that are not, and it limits the political expression of religious groups with the tax exemption. Here's a quote from the op-ed. Trump's toothless action is the inevitable consequence of years spent scaring white evangelicals with faux outrages. A problem with no victims requires nothing more than a solution with no substance. All Trump had to do was host some religious leaders in the garden, listen politely to some Christian music, repeat some religious right talking points about how free speech doesn't end at the steps of a cathedral, and voila, he becomes the savior of American Christianity. And the photo op with Trump and some Catholic nuns really is disgusting. I mean, how can they show up and embrace a hypocrite like him? It's stunning. Elections are underway in France. Sunday is the final voting for the runoff election between Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen. Based on all the reports that I've seen, and I have nothing special to add to this, it appears that Le Pen will not win, but that's what people thought here in the United States. The people who drank the Hillary Kool-Aid and were shocked on the day after the election. South Korea is also conducting a presidential election at this time, and this is to replace the female President Park, who resigned after being she didn't actually resign. She was booted after being impeached. And we could use a little of that here in the United States. I don't know too much about the South Korean candidates, so we'll see how that election turns out. Meanwhile, on the other side of the 38th parallel, it's not missiles being launched, it's propaganda bombs. Kim Jong-un's government has issued a rare direct criticism of China through a commentary saying that its reckless remarks on the North's nuclear program are testing its patience and could trigger unspecified grave consequences. The North Korean state-run news agency said that a string of absurd and reckless remarks are now heard from China every day, only to render the present bad situation even tenser. Well, they also launched one of those little barrages at the United States, claiming that they have busted up a plot by U.S. intelligence to assassinate Kim Jong-un. Now, this may very well be true. But North Korea says it recently uncovered a hideous terrorist group that the National Intelligence Service of South Korea, working with our CIA, had sent into the North on a secret mission to kill Kim with biochemical agents. Kind of like the way he had his brother or half-brother killed at the Kuala Lumpur airport just a few months back. A Navy SEAL was killed in Somalia yesterday, and this is the first American casualty since the Black Hawk Down incidents, the conflict, back in 1993. We don't have a name of the SEAL who was killed. We understand that there are about 300 American service members in Somalia at this time trying to counter al-Shabaab. And last year, the Pentagon announced 13 ground raids and airstrikes, an increase from 5 in 2015. So the Africa Command is getting more active in Somalia right now. We're standing by here for John Kiriakou to call in and join us here on the Peter B. Collins podcast today. And you can grab a line, too, if you'd like to comment on any of the news I'm talking about or talk to the former CIA officer, Mr. Kiriakou. My phone number here, you can call in. There are lines available, is 415-455-0102. That's 415-455-0102. Now, the auto industry in the United States is often a barometer of consumer confidence and disposable income. And it's a little troubling that layoffs are beginning with all of the major automakers because we have a 4-month trend of declining sales. In General Motors is notifying 1,100 workers in Lansing that they will be laid off this month, and the sales are down by about 100,000 units based on comparisons with last year. And also Wall Street is hitting the stocks. General Motors shares fell 3% Tuesday, and so there is trouble in Motown. The other issue is that while the unemployment figures are dropping, I think we hit about 4.1% last month, and new hirings were an increase over the month of March, we still have a huge number of people who are not participating in the workforce and who don't show up in the unemployment numbers. Here's a misguided lawsuit. Family members of those who were killed in the 2015 San Bernardino attack have sued Facebook, Twitter, and Google, claiming that the tech giants knew that terrorist groups like the Islamic State were using their platforms and networks to spread extremist agendas and didn't do enough to stop it. Now, this appears to come from a law firm that specializes in suits like this. They also have plaintiffs suing in the Orlando, Florida event. The lawsuit reads, for years, defendants have knowingly, recklessly provided the terrorist group ISIS with accounts to use its social networks as a tool for spreading extremist propaganda. Well, how about the phone companies? How about the internet service providers? And at what point do you claim that somebody who is allowing people to post messages or communicate is somehow aligned with them? And this is really a sad case of, I think, the victims being exploited by these lawyers. And I won't call them greedy sharks because I don't know that, but you could. And I'm still waiting for the evidence to surface about San Bernardino. You know, one of the critical pieces that was leaked by the FBI, the New York Times published it on a Sunday front page story. The claim that the woman, Tashfeen Malik, had posted a Pledge of Allegiance to the Islamic State leader al-Baghdadi, either shortly before, during, or after the shooting spree at that holiday party for county employees in San Bernardino. And we've never seen that. It has been asserted that she did it, but we have no evidence in public. And I hope you don't think that I'm being too picayune here. But this is a case that is now part of the shorthand for terrorist attacks that are blamed on the Islamic State. And at most, when you look at the government's narrative, Farouk and Malik were inspired to some extent by watching videos or communicating with people in other parts of the world. And if they hadn't used Facebook Messenger, there are many other ways, including WhatsApp and encrypted systems, they could have used. And so to punish not the messenger here, but the pigeon, the carrier pigeon, is really off base. And we still don't have the evidence to support many of the claims that have been made. I've got lines open if you'd like to talk with us today, and I'm standing by for a call from John Kiriakou, who's scheduled to join us right now. The number for you to call in on is 415-455-0102. That's 415-455-0102. And I want to take a moment here to tell you that last night I had a terrific time attending the San Francisco show of the musical Hamilton. And you've probably heard the buzz about Hamilton, and it is an incredible show. The songwriting, the historical presentation, the characters who all play white guys are all African Americans. The singing is stupendous. The choreography, the production. I mean, it was 3 hours, and it was seamless. And while I felt at the end it was just a little bit long, as I look back, there wasn't anything that I could say, oh, yeah, cut that out. And so it really does, I think, in a fabulous and entertaining way, help people understand some of the early history of the United States. And I want to thank Billy Cook, who is a listener and a subscriber from Eureka, who sent me his tickets. And I really appreciate the generosity, and Kathy and I had a great time. Thank you, Billy Cook. All right, here's a question for you. Colin Kaepernick is the San Francisco 49ers former quarterback. And last year, he made a national stir because he knelt down during the national anthem. And I support fully his right to do that. But now Colin Kaepernick is a free agent, and there is no team that has made him an offer. Now, it's also fair to say that he's been kind of a lousy quarterback. Excuse me. And perhaps the NFL teams are simply looking at his performance on the field. But I do think it's interesting, and I'd like to know your opinion. Do you think that NFL teams are avoiding Colin Kaepernick because of his politics? Here's another story that I didn't get to this week about a former FBI translator who held a top security clearance. Pardon me, I have an allergy, an allergy-based cough that hits me after I've been talking for about half an hour. Anyway, this woman was an FBI translator. Her name is Daniela Green. She lived in the U.S., and she was assigned to monitor an Islamic State fighter. And apparently she fell in love with her mark, because she was supposed to keep tabs on Dennis Cuthbert, a German rapper who had joined the Islamic State. But instead, she snuck into Syria, alerted him to the FBI's investigation, and married him. Now, so much for that part of the story. But my problem here is, let me find what she has been sentenced to. After returning to the U.S. in August of 2014, she had been arrested by the FBI, but she wasn't charged with providing material support to a terrorist organization, a charge that carries lengthy prison sentences. And if you recall my really good interviews, and I'm referring to my subjects, not myself, but with Trevor Aronson and with Bo Hodai, we know that people who are charged with these flimsy legal charges of providing material support, or even flimsier, conspiring to provide material support to a terrorist organization, these are really pernicious charges that have long sentences linked to them. But this former FBI translator was given a break. She was allowed to face a charge of making false statements to the FBI. She pled guilty. But many of the people who have been framed for so-called domestic terrorism cases here in the United States have not gotten the same break. I don't think that's fair. You're watching on Facebook the Peter B. Collins podcast, and I'm sorry to say that John Kiriakou has not called in. I've been watching the phone here looking for his call. He was scheduled to join us about 10 minutes ago, and I did arrange for a brief interview with him today, and he's going to Germany next week to promote his new book, which is called Doing Time Like a Spy. And after he returns, we're going to do an in-depth interview for the Peter B. Collins podcast. So, John, I don't know if you're watching on Facebook, but call me now at the number I gave you, and we can talk here today. And if I don't hear from you in a couple of minutes, we will work to reschedule that. Also, I want to take a moment to tip you to an interview I did earlier this week. And it's with an artist who I discovered has a studio about a mile from my secret studio here in Marin County, California. His name is Al Farrow. And I'm going to hold this beautiful, very beautifully produced book up to the camera here and see if you can get a good gander. This is a depiction of a synagogue. The verticals that you see on the left and right of the synagogue are Uzi submachine guns. The Star of David is surrounded by an array of bullets. And all of the features, for example, on the roof up there, just below the Star of David, all those little pieces there, those are crushed shell casings. So this is anti-war art that is created using guns and ammunition. And I saw a piece of this at a San Francisco gallery recently. I was struck by it, and I got to meet Al Farrow. And I invite you to listen to the in-depth interview that I released earlier this week at peterbcollins.com. And I have one more item for you. Nobody's calling, but if you want to grab a line, I'd be happy to talk with you. We're new at this Facebook Live thing, and I don't think too many people do a live show like this and invite people to call in. But you're welcome to dial me up right now and do it pronto. My number is 415-455-0102. One of our staunchest supporters and a longtime listener is Paul Elsesser, and he emailed me a link to this story today, which was published at Information Clearinghouse and authored by Finian Cunningham. And it is a look at the deep history of the United States-Britain's never-ending Cold War on Russia. And it goes all the way back to World War II. And it offers a kind of, these are not alternate facts, okay, but a kind of alternate history, suggesting that Washington and London leaders knew that the Nazis were exterminating Jews on a massive scale, and they didn't do anything about it. And it is fair to say, based on my reading of history, that American leaders were not very vocal about the crisis for European Jews, about the way that they were ghettoized and then rounded up and shipped off to death camps. And in this article, Cunningham has some interesting speculation, some of it based on David Talbot's powerful book, The Devil's Chessboard, subtitled Alan Dulles, the CIA, and the Rise of America's Secret Government. And what is suggested here is that even before World War II, that the U.S. and Britain were aligned to prevent the spread of communism, and that may have been a higher priority than confronting the humanitarian crisis, and it's hard to find the words to discuss the Holocaust in its real dimensions. So I'm going to link to this report in the show file for today's podcast, and I invite you to take a look and see if you think it's interesting and credible. I want to thank you for watching or listening to today's News and Comment podcast. I apologize that we weren't able to hear from John Kiriakou, and I did promote that to everybody, so I'm sorry that that didn't come through. But I am getting a phone call here now on the listener line, and let's see who's there. Good afternoon. You're on the Peter B. Collins Show.
Hi, Peter B. It's Susan.
Hi, Susan. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right, thank you. I've had a terrible cold, but I'm so much better today.
Well, and I've seen your posts on Facebook. You've had a number of challenges recently.
Oh, God, yes.
Yes, you have.
Talk about that. I've had 2 years of the most giant roller coaster in my body. It's been unbelievable.
Oh, that's a drag. Susan, hold on one sec. Hold on 1 second. We've got another caller here, and I want to put them on hold, okay? Hi, you're on the Peter B. Collins Show, and I'm going to ask you to hold for a minute, okay? Hello? Yeah. Not Susan, the other one. You hold, we'll be back to you, okay? So, Susan, I put that call on hold, but it hung up, so please call back. All right, Susan, you've got my full attention now. What is on your mind today?
Well, what's on my mind is, a lot of people are, talking about this whole Trump thing, and I really think that the Republicans are not going to cooperate with getting rid of him, even if he was proved the craziest person in the whole world, because they're getting what they want.
You're right.
So there's no incentive for them to get rid of them because they can just use them. And that's what they're doing. I think if he got wind of that, if he understood for a second that they were really just using him, he's not using them, that might turn things around.
Well, but you know what? Trump is a transactional guy. He doesn't have any real friends. He has people that he competes with either, for ego reasons or financial reasons or publicity reasons. But he doesn't care that other people are using him. And he really only cares about how much he can use those other people. And the extent to which they think they can use him probably encourages him thinking he's got better leverage on them.
Yeah, and who knows? He might.
Yeah, I mean, it is truly twisted. And as we see this specter, I called it a death bazaar yesterday, that these rich Republicans who will always be able to get whatever kind of health care they need, including, our good old Utah Inquisitor, Jason Chaffetz, who had to come out of the hospital and wheel himself into the House chamber to vote because he had had foot surgery for a pre-existing condition. and so, I mean, that goes beyond irony. It is so crude and cruel that these people are stealing money from the health care accounts of you and me. I'm an Obamacare user, and I believe you are, Susan.
Well, I'm Medicare, sure.
Yeah. And so they want to deny us coverage, limit the costs of our health expenditures in order to give a tax cut to people who don't need it.
I know.
And that is so base and amoral. And when you couple that with Trump in the Rose Garden yesterday with these evangelicals talking about religious freedom, well, Trumpcare is the freedom for poor people to die. And somehow, I don't think that qualifies for WWJD. What would Jesus do?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did you also notice what Jason Chaffetz did as soon as he got back? Was he wants to create a bill that would prevent any president who earns $400,000 a year from getting his full pension based on Obama going out and actually making that much for a speech. So he wants to take his pension away. I think that's pretty funny.
Well, it's just stupid, but yeah. I will say that Obama is being a little insensitive to people who supported him. I mean, there are too many contradictions here. This is the guy who didn't pursue a single prosecution of a white-collar criminal on Wall Street, despite the huge meltdown that occurred in 2008 and created the big albatross that Obama gets blamed for. You hear the Republicans say, the debt went up under Obama. Well, it did because of the stimulus package that he used to try to resuscitate the corpse that had been left by the Republicans. And so for him to now take this huge payday, it's even more than Hillary got for a single speech to Goldman Sachs, it is really, just very bad form. And I also was offended when Trevor Noah on The Daily Show said that people are only criticizing Obama for accepting this money because he's black. And that's not the case at all. And that's like the same people who said that when I criticized Hillary Clinton for her paydays from Wall Street and not just the Goldman Sachs payments, that somehow I was misogynist. And, people are real quick to use these labels to try to defend behavior, which I find indefensible. And keep in mind, Michelle and Barack Obama have signed book contracts that guarantee them $65 million.
Yeah, I saw that.
And they're not poor to begin with, okay? And so, to take this so soon after he left office is a real slap in the face to those of us who were, very disappointed in the way he handled the crimes of Wall Street to begin with.
Yeah, but then in a sense it doesn't make him a hypocrite at all because he never was on the other side of that.
Well, he paid lip service to it. And let's remember that in 2008, the early money behind Barack Obama was from Wall Street. Susan, thanks a lot for your call. You bailed me out today.
Love you. Bye-bye.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much. And since I mentioned misogyny, I'm going to close with this. There's a man who's a friend on Facebook who I don't actually know. He uses the name Noah, Oops, Wrong Planet, Henderson. And he published this the other day. For all the people who fling claims of misogyny against people who dislike Hillary, You are underinformed. Webster's defines misogyny as a hatred of women. You cannot conflate hatred of one woman with hatred of women in general. I can certainly dislike, even intensely, her shrill voice, her policies, her dishonesty, her thirst for power, her sense of entitlement, and her bearing, without being a misogynist. I suggest the term is badly misused these days as a way of punishing men who don't like Hillary, mostly by older white women who have their own need for Hillary to be successful, and also by males who are party-oriented in their politics rather than issues-oriented. He goes on, "Please know I'm not arguing about your feelings or opinions. I certainly have mine, and like you, I have my own personal reasons and needs for my opinions. That said, I completely disagree with these claims of misogyny, and I find them mistaken. If you want me to tell you you don't like my opinion, you can, but you cannot diminish my politics with that pompous, overblown, fetid claim of misogyny. Unless you can prove someone doesn't like women at all, save perhaps a small coterie of them, they are not misogynists, and you simply don't like their opinions." And in this thread the other night that got pretty heated on Facebook, I saw a post from a woman who I respect. She shattered a glass ceiling in television news in the 1970s. And she just wrote a short blurb, posted it on Facebook, and it said, "Anyone who doesn't think misogyny was a major factor in Hillary's loss is a misogynist." Now, that's not even rational. You can't back that up with any kind of argument or facts. It's an emotional claim, and it's a way to try to shut down people you don't agree with. I resent the M card, and I resent the race card. Hi, who's this on line one?
Hey, Peter, it's Ian Berman.
Hi, Ian. Good to hear from you. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing fabulous, thanks. What's on your mind?
Terrific. Just one thing following up on your point about Wall Street, point of my expertise. There were so many types of egregious violations that could have been prosecuted that Obama and his Justice Department never went near. For example, all the underwritten mortgage-backed securities that were underwritten without strict guidelines in terms of following their due diligence process, that was all fraud. More egregious even came later on when HSBC was found caught red-handed taking cash from the drug cartels and then moving that money, laundering that money in specially designed boxes that fit their teller windows.
Mm-hmm. Hey, and let's not forget the ratings agencies that took a look at crappy packages of mortgage-backed securities and declared them AAA when they knew that they might at best be triple C.
Oh, absolutely. And they also were caught red-handed with emails that said, well, we have to give out good ratings so we can get as many of these as rated possible, meaning they wanted to increase their revenues.
Right.
So basically they sold out their own integrity in order to increase their revenue.
And so what is your take on Obama giving this speech to, let's see, it's, oh gosh, what's the name of the firm? I can't summon it right now, but they lost a lot of people on 9/11. That's what we remember.
Oh, Cantor Fitzgerald.
Right. Uh-huh.
Well, it's an optics question. The actual speech and the money per se does not bother me as much as what he did during his presidency.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just bringing up bad memories to those people who said, well, he talked a really great game, he was a wonderful PR guy, but if you looked at his actual policies and what he did in office, he's anything but a progressive or liberal.
Yeah, I guess I'm not quite so generous because, this could be construed in the most extreme manner as a deferred payment for his forbearance regarding Wall Street criminals.
Oh, no doubt. Again, it's tough to connect. There's no way of really putting the two together.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing that most people don't know about, because maybe they don't know the trading markets too well, was when the Wall Street investment banks were rigging LIBOR. Now, LIBOR is the London Interbank Offered Rate, or in other words, the base lending rate that banks give to each other. But that base lending rate is in anywhere from $400 to $800 trillion of contracts. That's a trillion with a TR.
Yeah.
And when these banks were cynically rigging the rates so they could get paid off on what are relatively small bets to that size of that index, and they got caught, again, there wasn't any prosecutions. There may have been some in London, but certainly not in New York, Washington. And this is something that it's affected the entire financial markets around the globe, such an incredible scale. I mean, you know, the 400, even the 400,000 is mere 0.00001% on that.
Right.
So it's the question of what he really did in office, and yeah, you could be saying he's getting payback, but he already got that with the book deal.
Well, and if he actually gives some of this money away, I think it could soften the negative impact. But it just it does turn my stomach, frankly, to see it going on.
Absolutely. But let me raise a different point here that I'll let you address and then close up your show.
All right, Ian.
I don't know if you noticed after the vote today, the Democrats on the floor were cheering, hey, hey, goodbye.
Yeah.
To me, it seemed like the most cynical move that this false left could have provided. In essence, when Pelosi and other Democratic leaders come out and saying there's no way we're going to do a Medicare for all or some other type of universal health care, instead they're saying, well, look at what the Republicans did, so we're going to benefit because they're going to get kicked out of office. Instead of taking the opportunity to say, this is the time, America, we want health care for all, they're saying, this is the time, America, to vote Democrat. And that was the most galling thing I saw today.
Well, and I understand that Bernie Sanders has delayed the introduction of his single-payer bill in the Senate. Not that I expect it would be given a lot of attention, but I'm just disappointed that it's not even on the table. And, the other factor here is you're correct in your, I think, characterization of the Democrats. They want to score a political victory here, and they are using the potential deaths of up to millions of Americans who could lose coverage and end up dying because they can't access health care. And I've used that same language myself. I do think it is that severe. But they trivialize it by trying to, use this to set up a hope for a wave election for the House next year, because it will take a huge tidal wave to overcome the gerrymandering advantage that the Republicans have and that really is the basis of their House majority today. And so this is cynical. It is political. They're hoping that they can, move their voters, their political base, into activism next year. Typically the party in power, the Republicans, would expect to lose seats, particularly in the House, in a midterm election. And if they can keep this anger alive that long, Democrats are hoping for a miracle. But I would rather see them focus, like I think you're suggesting, on single payer and, use this moment to hang that around the necks of the Republicans who voted for this bad package yesterday that they hadn't even inspected or estimated the costs of. But that's politics in Washington, and I'll just close by saying that anybody who thinks that the Democratic Party represents meaningful resistance to the extremes of this Republican majority is, I think, sadly mistaken. And I've seen a lot of new activism that I'm delighted to observe across the country, but too much of it is linked to the Democratic Party. And when Hillary herself told Christiane Amanpour that she's part of the resistance,
yeah.
That's kind of the club I don't want to belong to. Ian, thank you for your call today and rounding out the program. It's always good to talk to you. My
pleasure, Peter. Have a great weekend.
All right, that wraps up our podcast and our live video feed on Facebook today. Hey, Chloe, come on over. They want to look at you again. Come here, Chloe. Come on. Chloe's napping.
Happy trails to you until we meet again.
Say bye-bye.
Happy trails to you. keep smiling